I'd like to welcome you back to our study in the book of 2 Corinthians. Today we're in 2 Corinthians, the 6th chapter. We're going to go back to verse number 5. Now, we've been talking about the traits that commend or set apart a person as a servant of God. If you didn't have a chance to listen yesterday, go back to yesterday's podcast because I just don't want to take all the time this morning to go back to verse number 4. But go back to yesterday's podcast and the day before that, because chapter 6 of 2 Corinthians is dealing with the Apostle Paul putting himself back into the place of ministering to the church at Corinth. And so he's talking about how he has commended himself, as a servant of God. The word commended means to set into place, to be put in a position. And Paul is saying these things are proof that I have been called by God, put into place as a servant of God. Now let's finish this list. We finished with beatings yesterday. Let's go back to verse number 5, where it says the next thing is imprisonment. Now, the word imprisonments, it's translated imprisonments, but it means in sleeplessness. This could be translated as constantly having to keep watch, constantly looking and thinking. You know, the Apostle Paul, not many years after this, he's going to be in prison. And on his second imprisonment in Rome, you know what? The Romans would never tell you when you were going to be executed. It was part of their torture. And so you're sitting in a pit, in a hole in the ground. Luke is up there ministering to the Apostle Paul. But Paul is sitting there and he's thinking, is today the day? Are they going to come for me today and take my life, take my head off outside the gates of the city of Rome? Are they going to come today? And so Paul's saying here, he's saying imprisonments, but it really means in constantly watching, aware, constantly on guard, guarding people from false teaching and guarding people from evil that's trying to come into the churches, but also on guard for himself and what's going to happen in my life and all of these things. The Apostle Paul says, I am constantly imprisoned. I am constantly, the Greek word means to constantly be on watch or to be sleepless. The next thing that he mentions is in hunger. And when he uses the word in hunger, it actually basically means to be in need. You know what? The Apostle Paul did not drive a brand new car. He didn't have an expense account. He didn't have all of these things. Now, I don't believe that he was always in need, but he had times where he was in need. And when a person is in need and they still remain, again, going back to the very first thing in this list, it's called patience. It means endurance. It means hanging in there. I believe that word was a covering word for all of these hardships that Paul is listing. Paul said, you know what? I've been in need, but I didn't quit. You see, when a leader gets to a point where they're in need and then all of a sudden they just throw up their hands and quit, you know what? They're proving to the people that are around them that they are not operating and as a servant of God, and going all the way back to the beginning of this week, they are not using the grace of God, their partnership with God in their ministry. Now, let's move on to verse number 6. This is what it says, 2 Corinthians, the 6th chapter, verse number 6. And the Apostle Paul now starts and he begins to talk about traits of a leader. And these are traits that are positive traits. Instead of the negative traits that we've just covered, now Paul starts a list of positive traits. And he says this in verse number 6. And he says, in purity. In purity. The word purity actually comes from the Greek word hagios, and it means holiness. The Apostle Paul lived a life that was pure, sincere, a life that you could look at his life and you would say that is holy. That person is living a holy lifestyle. As a servant of God, if you want to commend yourself, place yourself in a position, this is what you need to do. You need to live a holy lifestyle. You need to live in holiness. Those who have served with me in leadership, this is one of the things I always say. You need to be a step ahead of everybody else when it comes to holiness. You see, I think that holiness is a calling card. In fact, I don't think I know it. Living a life of holiness is a calling card that says to people, you know what? You're not going to have to be offended by this ministry. This ministry is not going to be discredited because this ministry is living in holiness. Now, let me just say this. That's why I believe that leadership needs to live in an aquarium. I had a guy come to me and he said, I'm so tired of living in this fish tank. He was a leader. And I said, what are you trying to hide? Because he was constantly, in fact, not long after that, we found out he was committing adultery. You know what? Leadership, you're going to live in a fish tank. You're going to have people walking up to you and they're going to be looking and watching. And one of the calling cards, one of the things that's going to set you apart is a life of holiness. Don't be separated from the people, but let them see you and let them see you living a life of holiness. And you know what will happen? They'll begin to live what you portray, what you show them. Enough of that. In knowledge. The word knowledge here is the Greek word gnosis, and it means an incomplete or fragmented knowledge. The servant of God needs knowledge. Study, 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 study. The Apostle Paul wrote to Timothy and says, study to show yourself approved, a workman, not to be ashamed. Study, study, study. I graduated from Bible college in 1977. One of my professors told me, he said, Leon, if you stop studying, you stop growing. If you stop, actually he said, if you stop learning, you stop growing. Continue to study. Study. You see, knowledge is something that will set you apart from everybody else. Now, I believe this is knowledge of scriptures, knowledge of God, having good theology, solid theology. It sets you apart as a servant of God. Now, tomorrow we're going to continue our study in this positive list of character traits of a servant of God. Thank you for watching.